He struck me while I stood in my wedding gown, my navy dress whites, before 280 witnesses, corporate titans, Navy SEALs, generals, my brothers, his boardroom allies. Then he mocked my medals, dismissing them as trivial. Those medals were my father's final gift to me. A public shaming cloaked in tailored fury. I'm Millicent Draper, Lieutenant Commander in the U.S. Navy. Daughter of Victor Draper, the billionaire real estate magnate, a Forbes icon who groomed his sons to rule his empire, but expected his daughter to remain voiceless. I refused to stay quiet. Not when he disowned me for choosing the Navy. Not when he ignored every deployment, every promotion, and not when he tried to crush me one last time in a chapel filled with those who had fought by my side. If you're curious about how we reached the moment when my SEAL fiancé seized my father's wrist and shifted everything, you need to understand what led up to that slap. It wasn't the breaking point, it was the moment of truth. The slap sound hit me before its sting. A piercing crack echoed through the chapel, bouncing off stained glass and stone, cutting the silence like a blade. My cheek burned, but I stood firm, unshaken as I had in Kandahar sandstorms or on the pitching decks near Okinawa. This wasn't the first time my father tried to break me, but it was the first time he did it before 280 pairs of eyes. I stood in my navy whites at the heart of St. John's Cathedral in Houston, Texas, on my wedding day. The man who struck me wasn't a stranger or a battlefield foe. He was Victor Draper, my father, head of Draper Real Estate Group, a celebrated tycoon, a man America admired for his empire, but who never valued mine. I was halfway down the aisle, caught between two worlds. To my left, sleek suits, silk ties, and gleaming cufflinks, the weight of wealth and murmured deals. To my right, combat fatigues, service ribbons, prosthetic limbs, and the steady gazes of those who'd faced war with me. Then he rose, my father, standing like a polished statue in designer fabric, his voice slicing through the air with precision. Remove those foolish medals. I didn't argue or beg. I simply said, no. That's when his hand struck. It wasn't just a blow to my face. It was an attack on every deployment I'd survived, every night spent in a tent listening to radio static, wondering if morning would arrive. He didn't just hit his daughter, he struck the life I'd earned. I hadn't even shifted when James stepped forward. No yelling, no drama, just quiet, disciplined strength as he clasped my father's wrist, his voice low, steady and unmistakable. You just struck a decorated U.S. Navy officer. Then they stood, all 280 guests, not in outrage or chaos, but as witnesses to a moment. In that instant, I was no longer just Victor Draper's daughter. I was my own. I was raised in a mansion, or so it appeared. The Draper estate in Highland Park, Dallas, graced countless real estate magazines. Mahogany walls, baccarat chandeliers, a 3-story wine cellar, and a grand piano untouched for 17 years. But there was no warmth, no smell of morning coffee, no leisurely weekend brunches, just the sound of polished shoes, the tick of clocks measuring efficiency, and praise that felt like corporate memos. My brothers, Henry, Kyle, and Nathan, were the Draper dynasty's heirs, dressed in monogram shirts from childhood, schooled in golf with Dad, and trained in IPO strategies before they hit puberty. And me. Your worth lies in the man you marry, not in what you achieve, my father told me, never quite meeting my gaze. My mother was different. She didn't defy him openly, but she planted quiet rebellions in my path. Books about Amelia Earhart, a leather journal inscribed with, "You're more than your father's expectations." One night, she left a U.S. Naval Academy brochure in my desk drawer. I stared at her wide-eyed. She gave a gentle smile. "You don't need to inherit anything, Millie. Just live your truth." I clung to that brochure like a lifeline until the day I sent my application to Annapolis. I still recall the dinner when I announced it. Same as every night, silver utensils, medium-rare steak, golden light, and a silence colder than any fight. I waited until Dad asked Henry about his Morgan Stanley interview, then spoke. "I've applied to the Naval Academy." The silence shattered. Nathan coughed on his water. Kyle smirked. Dad set his knife down, the oak table creaking under the moment's weight. "If you pursue this military foolishness, don't come back to this house." I didn't cry or justify myself. I turned to my mother and she nodded, no tears, just a look that said, "You'll endure this." 3 months later, she died of pancreatic cancer. Her last note to me read, "Stay true, even when no one cheers." I've carried those words through every deployment, tucked beside my military ID, behind my credit card, and deep within me where applause never mattered. I still remember my first day on the Naval Academy's training field. 5 a.m., cold enough to sting my skin through my stiff uniform. A junior officer passed by, glanced at me, and sneered. Draper's little heiress, playing soldier before running back to yachts and country clubs. Huh? I didn't respond. I dropped to the ground, counted every crunch, and turned his scorn into strength. My first 4 years in service weren't about proving anything to my father. I wasn't making a statement. I served because I knew I was right. No letters home, no Christmas calls, no hope of hearing, "I'm proud of you." Words I hadn't heard since I was 10. Still, I tried. After an ambush in Helmand, Afghanistan, where I was a logistics officer, not in combat, I crawled through sand to pull a wounded corporal from a burning transport truck. When the chopper landed, my uniform soaked in blood that wasn't mine, I received a commendation medal. I sent my father a photo, me saluting beside the colonel, medal case in hand. A week later, an envelope arrived. No note, just a magazine clipping. Nathan Draper, youngest CFO in Texas history, with his handwritten note, "This is true success." I burned the paper in the base's incinerator, watching the flames and feeling nothing. I met James at Naval Station Pensacola during a logistics briefing. I was presenting a supply route plan. Dry, technical, after 4 hours of sleep. My bun was messy. My voice faltered on slide 7. I didn't expect anyone to notice. But after the briefing, James approached, still in training gloves, his eyes calm, no posturing, no rank games. "You're not just moving supplies," he said, his voice steady. "You're saving lives." I froze, not because it was flattery, but because it was the first time someone saw me, not my name or rank. We started with mess hall dinners, then late night coffee, then PT sessions that stretched longer than necessary. James didn't clutter silence with words. He let it linger, meaningful. He noticed I avoid sugar, dislike tomatoes, and step away when someone says, "You're pretty sharp for a woman." One rainy night in Norfolk, walking the pier, grit stinging my face, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I can't promise smooth waters," he said, "but I'll navigate with you." I didn't cry, I didn't need to. I just nodded. The next week, I sent a card to Dallas. "I'm getting married. St. John's Cathedral, 1,300 hours. I'll be in uniform. No RSVP expected, just a statement." I no longer needed his approval to live my truth. There was no response, no call, no email, nothing. But I knew he'd come. Not out of love or duty, but because the thought of people whispering he skipped his daughter's wedding would wound his pride more than seeing me in uniform. I was right. 3 days before the wedding, at a small pre-ceremony dinner in Austin hosted by my aunt, who always courted Victor's favor, he appeared. Black suit, gold cufflinks, Italian leather shoes. His cologne hit like boardroom polish, sharp, artificial, overwhelming. I turned away, ready to ignore him. He didn't allow it. Leaning close, his voice a whisper, he said, "You're not wearing that uniform in front of Houston's elite." I swallowed, cold air scraping my throat, but I held my ground. "I'm not marrying you," I replied. "I'm marrying James, and I'll wear what reflects my truth." He stepped back, poured a bourbon, and stared at me like a ledger he'd already written off. That night, pressing my dress whites in my quarters at Ellington Field, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't saved but would never forget. The message read, "You'll regret this tomorrow." I powered off the phone. No trembling, no fear, just me, unfolding my mother's last letter from the pocket near my heart, tracing her words, "Stay true, even when no one cheers." I stood in St. John's Cathedral's side hallway, the air thick with wax and cedar, a draft slipping through stone crevices. Hill, who led us through Syria with no room for error, stood to my left. Torres, with his prosthetic leg and combat medal, grinned to my right, as if he'd laughed in the face of hell. Both were in full uniform, silent. We weren't marching into battle, but the weight felt the same. You look like a commander ready for the field, Hill said, eyes steady. Only this time, Torres added, we're walking with you. I glanced through the chapel doors. To the left, 80 guests in crisp collars and $5,000 suits. There for power, connections, Victor Draper. To the right, uniforms, scars, grit, people who'd fought and bled with me. I stepped forward, each step ringing against stone, syncing with my pulse. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, catching the medals on my chest. Not ornaments, but evidence. Halfway down the aisle, he stood. No one stopped him. No one looked shocked. My father stepped forward, shoes striking like a judge's gavel, blocking the path between me and James, my past and my future. Take off those ridiculous medals, he said, not loudly, but clear enough. No one laughed. No one stirred. I met his gaze and said, no, his hand rose. The slap landed hard, my cheek burning, the sound snapping through the chapel like a gunshot. A glass shattered behind me. Someone gasped, but I didn't waver. I stood steady, as every soldier learns to do when the earth trembles. The chapel's air grew heavy, stifling. No one spoke. No one breathed. A sharp inhale came from near the stained glass. Hill's eyes flickered, like a spark before an explosion. Torres stood rigid, his hand tightening on his cane. But before I could react, James was there. No raised voice, no spectacle, just one calm step, like crossing a line drawn years ago. He reached out, the hand that steadied me through turbulence, held mine under war-zone rotors, and now closed gently, firmly, around my father's wrist. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It was final. Then he spoke, not shouting, just 8 clear words. You just struck a decorated U.S. Navy officer. The silence broke. Hill's voice cut through, sharp and clear. Admiral on deck. Every military guest, veterans, commanders, battle-worn, rose as one. Uniforms crisp, hands saluting. Even some civilians, uncertain but respectful, stood quietly. All 280 guests, many who once toasted my father in boardrooms, now saw him as something diminished. Victor Draper, who could quiet a room with a glance, stood trembling, still held by James, no longer a Titan, just a man who'd lost the one thing he couldn't buy back, respect. My father stepped back. James released his wrist slowly, deliberately, like letting go of something fragile or already broken. He didn't glare or lash out. He just looked at him with the calm of someone who'd seen real war and deemed this unworthy of further effort. That look said it all. There was nothing more to say. My father glanced instinctively to the left, toward his world. Financiers, developers, legacy donors, people who'd built careers on his name. They looked back with something colder than fear. Realization. The man they'd admired, envied, followed had just struck a decorated U.S. Navy officer, his own daughter, not in private, but before the nation's uniform. No one defended him. No one spoke. No one even coughed. Victor Draper lowered his head, not in regret, but in defeat. He turned, walked up the aisle, past names he'd once wielded like capital, through a silence thick enough to choke, and slipped out the back door, his shadow fading with him. No applause, no empire to carry him. For years, he'd ruled my childhood with "don't embarrass me." Now he'd diminished himself without my help. I didn't chase him or watch him go. In that moment, I realized something 32 years and 3 combat zones had taught me. I didn't need his approval to know I was right. James stood beside me, his eyes steady, his hand brushing mine. Not for support, but for unity. Hill and Torres, who'd walked through more of this world with me than my father ever had, stepped aside. Their part was done. The fight was over, and I stood tall. The chaplain, voice trembling, spoke into the mic, "Shall we proceed?" I didn't hesitate or look back. I nodded, clear and certain. Yes, let's begin. The ceremony continued. No fanfare, no theatrics, just truth, ours alone. James held my hand, strong and steady as he had the first time we met in a Florida training camp. The same hand that pulled a teammate from a riptide, wrote transfer requests for those too broken to ask, and tapped my back when flashbacks stole my breath. When the chaplain said, to protect, to serve, to honor, I didn't just hear vows. I heard the echo of every moment I'd served unseen. Suddenly, it all had a place. Not everyone stands in a space forged from sacrifice and calls it joy. After the ceremony, James turned to me, his thumb grazing my cheek, still warm from my father's strike. "Does it hurt?" he asked. I smiled. "Not anymore." He looked at me, not with pity, but with pride. "They won't remember the slap," he said softly. "They'll remember how you stood." I didn't speak, because I knew he was right. The slap wasn't the story. The story was that I didn't flinch, didn't fall, didn't break. That moment wasn't about shame. It was about claiming my voice, my name, the space I'd fought to own without apology. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the burden of proving myself. I was simply living the truth of who I'd become. Not Victor Draper's daughter, not someone's disgrace, not a pawn. I was Millicent, and they'd remember me for how I stood, not for who tried to bring me down. Please subscribe to my channel for more stories like this.